Wait, let's really get into this. Today we are strapping in for a truly rigorous examination of divine authority. It's all encapsulated in one of the Bible's shortest, yet, well, most explosive texts, Psalm 99. This psalm isn't just a poem of praise, it's more like a theological blueprint. It defines the core nature of the eternal King, his terrifying sovereignty, his perfect justice, and his foundational holiness.
It is a powerhouse of a text, and it's one that's often overlooked, but it's entirely crucial for anyone seeking to understand, the relationship between God and humanity. While a lot of Psalms invite us into intimacy, Psalm 99 really confronts us with majesty. It just doesn't allow for a casual approach. It commands law, and it reveals why every knee, and really the entire cosmos, should acknowledge and tremble before the one true ruler.
Right. And guiding us through this dense and complex text is the comprehensive analysis that's been provided by the UNFIJ in Jesus team. Their work gives us really the critical roadmap we need to navigate the specific language of the King James Version and the profound theological concepts layered within it.
And our mission today, and this is tailored specifically for you, the dedicated learner, is really clear. We are going to extract the most critical insights from this powerful royal psalm.
Okay.
Our goal is to understand precisely the nature of the eternal King's operation, how he rules, how he judges, and how we are meant to approach him. All to provide you with deep knowledge without that feeling of information overload.
And that roadmap you mentioned, the one from the UNFIJ in Jesus team, it quickly zeroes in on three towering, non-negotiable themes that really form the structure and the foundation of this entire psalm.
First and foremost is the theme of absolute sovereignty. The psalm just begins with this unequivocal statement that God reigns. It means his rule is comprehensive, it's eternal, and it's completely unshakable by any earthly power or human event.
Okay, so that's number one, sovereignty.
Second, we find this indispensable theme of perfect justice. This is the moral backbone of his rule.
The king doesn't rely on arbitrary or, tyrannical power. He actively loves judgment, which means his authority is exercised through the highest possible standard of fairness, equity, and righteousness.
And the third?
And finally, the theme that acts almost like a gravitational force throughout the whole text. It appears and reappears as the ultimate reason for all worship and submission.
And that is?
Unapproachable holiness. The fact that God is completely pure, separate, and just distinct from all sin and human imperfection.
So to properly set the tone, I think we have to jump straight into that opening declaration, the sentence that immediately establishes this universal hierarchy. All right, let's start with the literal image of the king taking his seat. Can you please read us Psalm 99, verse 1 from the King James Version?
Of course. Psalm 99.1. The Lord reigneth, let the people tremble. He sitteth between the cherubims, let the earth be moved.
The Lord reigneth. I mean, that's the declaration of absolute sovereignty, plain and simple.
It is. But the imagery that follows, he sitteth between the cherubims, that is far from simple. That feels highly technical. What is the significance of the king sitting specifically between the cherubims?
This is perhaps the most loaded phrase in the whole opening section. The analysis confirms that sitteth between the cherubims is a direct, precise reference to the architecture of God's localized dwelling place on earth.
Which is the mercy seat.
The mercy seat.
The lid, basically. The crown of the Ark of the Covenant.
Exactly. You have to visualize this. The Ark was a simple gold-covered chest, and it contained the written law. Placed right on top of that chest was the mercy seat, and it was flanked by two large, intricately crafted cherubim statues whose wings extended over the seat.
And this whole thing was inside the Holy of Holies, the most restricted sacred space, first in the tabernacle and then later in the temple.
Right.
So when the psalmist declares that God sits there, he's signifying not just some spiritual or cosmic rule, but a physically anchored, engaged, and, terrifyingly close rule.
Precisely. It meant that God's sovereignty wasn't just some distant concept up in the heavens. It was tangibly present, represented by this earthly throne right in the heart of Israel's community and worship. The Ark of the Covenant was the meeting place, the visible nexus of divine and human interaction. It symbolized that the eternal king chooses to anchor his power among his people.
And that level of intimate presence, I imagine, makes the next command even more potent.
It does.
Which is the commanded reaction, let the people tremble and let the earth be moved. Now, when we hear tremble in modern English, we think of fear, panic, maybe even being sick. Why is this trembling necessary?
This is a really crucial semantic distinction that the research helps us clarify. This is not negative, paralyzing fear, not the kind that makes you want to run away.
Okay.
Instead, as the analysis emphasizes, this trembling signifies a response of profound and overwhelming awe and reverence.
Awe, not terror.
Yeah.
A response that's proportionate to the sheer perfection and boundless power of the subject.
Yes, exactly. When you stand before something infinitely greater than yourself, something completely pure and unshadable, your natural reaction is physical and psychological awe. It's the recognition of your own smallness next to his greatness. And our source material connects this dynamic response to the constant nature of God's rule, even in the heavenly realm.
The cross-reference to Revelation chapter 4, verse 5 is so powerful here, isn't it?
It is. That verse describes the heavenly throne room, and it says lightnings and thunderings and voices proceed from the throne. It paints this scene of dynamic, active, even violent power.
So the rule of God isn't static. It's not passive or quiet.
Not at all. It's active, it's constant, and it's awe-inspiring, which reinforces this idea of God as the utterly unshakable king. And if the heavenly court responds with dynamic power, well, the earthly population should respond with reverence.
I understand the theological beauty of acknowledging the unshakable king, but let's bring this to the learner today. You know, someone navigating a chaotic world where they feel their own control is the only anchor they have. The practical application the analysis provides is to let go of the need for control. Expert speaker. That is a monumental ask.
It is.
How do we square that command with the reality that we are commanded elsewhere to be diligent stewards, to plan, and to be responsible?
And that is where the challenge lies, and it's a necessary tension point. The research provided guides us not toward passivity, but toward reprioritization.
Okay, reprioritization.
Diligence, planning, stewardship, those all remain essential duties, but they must operate under the umbrella of his absolute sovereignty, not against it.
Meaning, I can plan my week, but I have to hold that plan loosely, knowing that the ultimate outcome is under the control of the one who sits between the cherubim.
Precisely. The act of letting go of control isn't relinquishing responsibility, it's relinquishing anxiety. When we know the king is unshakable and his rule is perfect, we approach life's uncertainties with profound respect and trust, rather than with debilitating fear.
So the practical step is
to trust his perfect rule, replacing self-reliance with divine dependence. This perspective shift, as emphasized by the "You Need Faith in Jesus" team analysis, is what calms our deep-seated anxieties.
Now the psalm moves to localize this immense power, grounding it in a specific geographic space. Let's hear verses 2 and 3.
All right, Psalm 99, verses 2 and 3. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is high above all the people. Let them praise thy great and terrible name, for it is holy.
Okay, in Zion. Why does the psalm declare God's greatness specifically in Zion? If he's the cosmic ruler, shouldn't his greatness be everywhere equally?
It's this concept of chosen manifestation. Zion, or Jerusalem, was the city God chose to place his name. It was the physical location of the temple, the place where his covenant people gathered to meet him. So this localization signifies that while his power is universal, he chose to manifest and anchor his authority in a specific place to demonstrate his engagement with his people.
So it highlights that engaged authority, but then verse 2 immediately balances that. It says he is high above all the people.
And this is that transcendence and immanence dynamic in action. He's intimately involved with Israel, with Zion, but he's not limited or defined by his relationship with them or with any earthly nation.
He's sovereign above all the people.
Meaning above all rulers, all nations, all human systems of power. You have to remember, in the context of the ancient Near East, local gods were often confined to local territories. This was a radical assertion of universal, unparalleled authority.
And this leads us directly to the command about his name. Let them praise thy great and terrible name. We touched on the KJV term terrible, but we really need to dive deeper into why this name demands praise.
The linguistic context of that KJV word terrible is just critical here. It has nothing to do with modern horror or fear. It conveys awe, gravity, and magnificent power. The analysis from the You Need Faith in Jesus team defines it as meaning fearsome, worthy of the deepest reverence, and overwhelmingly awesome.
So it's not scary, it's significant.
Think of a judge whose reputation for absolute fairness is so ironclad that every single person who enters his court feels an immediate, profound sense of solemnity. That's the idea.
That solemnity, that gravitational sense of magnitude, that's what drives the praise. But the ultimate foundation is found in that final clause, for it is holy.
And that phrase, for it is holy, is the explanatory engine of the entire passage. Holiness is the single defining characteristic of God's nature. It means he is totally pure, utterly separate from all sin, corruption, and moral imperfection. And it's this purity that ensures his greatness isn't arbitrary power, but power exercised perfectly.
So if his name were only great, he could be a despot. But because it is holy, he is righteous.
Exactly. And this truth is validated by the ultimate scene of worship. The analysis compels us to cross-reference to the ceaseless declaration of his nature in the highest court of heaven. We find that in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 3,
Which says,
"Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory."
holy, holy, holy. That triune repetition, it emphasizes the infinite depth of that purity. It shows that the central, constant activity of heaven is just acknowledging God's holiness.
Therefore, our worship on earth is meant to mirror the constant reality of heaven. The implication here is that our praise has to be rooted in who God is, his holy, unchanging character, not merely what he does for us in specific moments.
That is a profound distinction. It moves worship from being a transaction like, I praise you because you answered my prayer, to an acknowledgement of being, I praise you because your very nature demands it.
And this holiness, when you truly grasp it, should just amplify our understanding of grace exponentially. The "you need faith in Jesus" team reflection here is beautifully succinct. It says contemplating God's absolute purity should lead us to marvel that there is any pathway at all for imperfect, sinful humanity to approach him.
Because logically, a being of absolute purity should, incinerate anything impure upon contact. The gulf should be completely unbridgeable.
Yet the promise is that through the mediated access provided by Jesus Christ, our one high priest, we are allowed to approach this perfectly holy God. And that contrast between the unapproachable holiness described in the Old Testament and the granted access in the New that should fuel our deepest gratitude and continuous worship.
Okay, so having established the king's sovereign character and holy nature, the psalm now defines the moral character of his rule, divine justice. This is critical for the learner to understand, especially when you're looking for stability in such a morally ambiguous world.
This verse is the pivot point. It's where we go from declaration of character to application of rule. Let's examine Psalm 99, verse 4. "The king's strength also loveth judgment. Thou dost establish equity. Thou executest judgment and righteousness in Jacob."
I find that phrase, the king's strength also loveth judgment, so compelling. Why is it significant that his strength loves justice rather than just, enforcing it?
It speaks to the integrity of his power. If a king merely enforces justice out of obligation, that enforcement might be sporadic or flawed, right?
That could be inconsistent.
But because God's immense strength is inherently guided by a passionate love for judgment, for fairness and rightness, we know his power will never be exercised arbitrarily. Justice isn't just a tool he uses, it is a core function of his very being.
It guarantees that his authority is always exercised based on perfect fairness, equity, and righteousness.
Indeed. And he demonstrated this practically by establishing this moral standard for his people, for Jacob, which means the nation of Israel. When God handed down the law, he wasn't just imposing random restrictions, he was expressing his own perfectly just character in a tangible, understandable system. He established equity through the law.
This principle of divine justice, it has to be unchanging, or our security just evaporates.
Absolutely. The source material solidifies this truth by directing us to a fundamental description of God's reliability, which we find in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4. "He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he."
Just and right is he. Okay, that provides immense comfort. But I have to ask the challenging question here. If he is the rock and his strength loves judgment perfectly, why does the world appear so wildly unjust? Why do we, the learners, still experience corrupt governance, systemic unfairness, or just devastating personal injustice on a daily basis?
That is the perennial question, and Psalm 99 addresses it by demanding a cosmic perspective. The psalm asserts God's perfect execution of justice in Jacob, meaning his standard is established regardless of human corruption.
Yeah.
The analysis reminds us that while God's justice is immutable, its full execution is not always immediate or even visible on our human timeline.
So we find security not in the world's immediate perfection, but in the certainty of God's eventual perfect oversight.
Precisely. We trust the rock, even when the human landscape around us feels like shifting sand. And this security, as our guiding analysis points out, it isn't meant for passive enjoyment. It carries a profound responsibility.
And that responsibility is the practical challenge.
Yeah.
If we worship a God who loves justice, we can't just shrug off the injustice we see around us.
No. The actionable step derived here is that the security we find in God's justice should challenge us to reflect his character by acting with fairness and integrity in all our personal relationships and our professional responsibilities. We're called to embody the rule of the eternal King within our own smaller spheres of influence.
That requires active, ethical decision-making. It moves our faith from abstract contemplation to real-world application, bringing the King's standard of equity and righteousness into the mundane, daily ethical choices we all have to make.
It turns us into agents of his justice, not merely recipients of his comfort.
We now hit the Psalm's first liturgical command. This is the refrain that interrupts the theological description and demands an immediate physical and mental response from the worshiper.
This is the moment where the psalm transitions from describing God to commanding the human response to him. Psalm 99, verse 5 states, "Exalt you the Lord our God, and worship at his footstool, for he is holy."
Let's look at the components of this command. First, exalt ye the Lord our God. How do we, mere mortals, exalt the infinite King?
To exalt means to lift him high. It's an act of valuing him above everything else. We elevate him in our estimation, in our praise, and in our priority. We acknowledge that he and he alone occupies the highest rank in the universe, and therefore in our lives.
Okay, so that's the vertical upward motion. The second part, worship at his footstool, is the immediate counterweight. It's the downward motion of humility.
It is the command for profound humility and submission. In the temple context, the source material suggests that the footstool refers either directly to the Ark of the Covenant, where God sat enthroned between the cherubim, or to the entire earth, which Isaiah describes as God's footstool.
So regardless of whether it's the physical ark or the entire earth, the command means the same thing. Come low before the King.
It signifies complete submission. True worship requires this balanced act of lifting God high while simultaneously kneeling ourselves low. And notice the immediate return to the reason for this posture.
For he is holy.
Exactly. That holiness is the only non-negotiable foundation for this kind of worship.
That's the constant engine of the psalm. But let's be honest about the practical difficulty here. In a modern society driven by individualism, self-assertion, the pursuit of personal maximum potential, submission to a footstool sounds like weakness. It sounds like a negation of self. What does true submission look like when we're constantly being told to elevate ourselves?
That tension is very real, and the analysis directly confronts it. Submission, when it's directed toward the perfectly holy and just King, is not weakness. It is the ultimate expression of wisdom and strength. Submission means aligning our finite, flawed will with the infinite, perfect will of the King.
It's recognizing that the ultimate security comes not from our own strength, but from our position under his protection.
Exactly. The "You Need Faith in Jesus" team beautifully connects this act of humility and exaltation forward, showing its ultimate fulfillment in the future universal recognition of Jesus.
You are referencing the magnificent declaration in Philippians chapter 2, verses 9 through 11.
Indeed, we are shown the future moment when submission becomes universal. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord.
So Psalm 99 is, in a way, training us for that very moment, the moment when all beings, willingly or unwillingly, perform this act of bowing, this act of submission to the reigning King.
And the synthesis leads to the core practical step for the learner today. True worship requires both lifting God up and humbling ourselves down. Therefore, our actionable step is to live daily by putting his will first and giving him the glory, acknowledging our complete moment-by-moment dependence on him for our existence, our purpose, and our success.
That shifts the focus from what do I want to accomplish to what does the King require of me today. It's a fundamental reordering of priorities. Now, the psalm provides concrete historical evidence anchoring these theological concepts in the lives of specific revered figures. These verses prove that God is not only sovereign, but also intimately communicative and responsive.
These historical examples demonstrate the nature of the active two-way relationship that God desires with his servants. Let's look at Psalm 99, verses 6 and 7. Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Samuel among them that call upon his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. He spake unto them in the cloudy pillar. They kept his testimonies and the ordinance that he gave them.
Moses, Aaron, and Samuel. They represent the three pillars of Old Testament leadership, don't they? The prophet lawgiver, the priest, and the judge. The psalm holds them up as the gold standard of powerful intercessors.
And the key detail is the reciprocity. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. This was not just wishful thinking. This was a dynamic, functioning dialogue. They were influential because they had the ear of the king.
And the psalm gives us this remarkable detail about the mechanics of that communication.
Uh-huh.
He spake unto them in the cloudy pillar.
This is a highly specific physical manifestation of God's presence. The cloudy pillar was the visible guiding sign that led Israel through the wilderness, a cloud by day, fire by night. To say God spoke from there emphasizes that he is a personal, present God who makes himself known and accessible to his obedient servants.
But if they called and he answered, what was the mechanism? What was the foundation that made their prayers effective enough to elicit such a direct, personal response?
That insight is provided clearly in the second half of verse 7. Quote, they kept his testimonies and the ordinance that he gave them. The effectiveness of their prayer life wasn't due to some inherent charisma or special status. It was founded upon their obedience to God's revealed will.
Their relationship with the king was defined by submission to his rule. I want to press that point, though. Does this imply that answered prayer is conditional on perfection? If the learner struggles with consistent obedience, does the king just tune them out?
That's a fair and important clarification. The analysis provided guides us away from the idea that this is some kind of transactional perfectionism. It emphasizes that this obedience is foundational alignment, not flawless execution.
Okay.
These three men, Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, they were far from perfect, but their lives were marked by a commitment to follow God's revealed will, and that set the stage for communication. Their obedience demonstrated a genuine respect for the king on the throne.
So we should see obedience not as the price of prayer, but as the context of prayer, the respectful alignment that allows for true dialogue.
Exactly. To illustrate this, let's consider Moses' intercession. The You Need Faith in Jesus team analysis highlights his actions after the golden calf incident in Exodus 32. The people had flagrantly disobeyed, God's wrath was justified. But Moses, he obeyed God's call to leadership and immediately stepped into the gap, interceding on their behalf, appealing to God's character and covenant faithfulness.
And God listened to his appeal. He relented from the judgment he had planned.
He did. Moses' prayer was incredibly effective, not because he was flawless, but because, despite his temper and his flaws, his life's direction was one of committed obedience to the king's covenant purpose. This fact is so foundational that God himself later uses these figures as the ultimate standard for prayer.
The cross-reference to Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 1, confirms this high regard for their intercession.
In that moment of intense judgment against Israel, God effectively says, Then said the Lord unto me, Though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my mind could not be toward this people. Cast them out of my sight and let them go forth.
Wow.
God uses them as the absolute standard of influential prayer, even while demonstrating that sometimes judgment is immutable.
That is immense encouragement for the learner today. God is personal, he answers, and he invites us into a dialogue.
Which brings us to the core practical applications synthesized from this section. We have to acknowledge that a life of obedience to God's word is foundational to a powerful and effective prayer life. Our consistent submission to the King is what establishes the sincerity of our dialogue with him.
All right, now we arrive at what seems like the most theologically complex verse in the psalm. It's the one that holds the paradox of God's nature in a single sentence. It's where God's mercy and his rigor meet.
This verse requires careful deconstruction because it balances two truths that can often seem incompatible to our human logic. Let us read Psalm 99, verse 8 carefully. Thou answerest them, O Lord our God. Thou wast a God that forgavest them, though thou tookest vengeance of their inventions.
Okay, let's start with the mercy side of that. God answers their prayers and forgives sin. He was a God that forgave them. That is pure covenantal grace extended to Moses, Aaron, and the, often rebellious Israelites.
Yes, demonstrating divine compassion. But the balance, the justice side, is shocking in its intensity, though thou tookest vengeance of their inventions.
What exactly does vengeance of their inventions truly encompass?
The analysis provided clarifies this critical KJV phrase. Inventions refers to their self-willed, sinful deeds or schemes, the things they cooked up in defiance of God's established rule.
Nice.
Therefore, vengeance of their inventions means God executed just, temporal punishment or consequences for their sinful actions.
This draws a vital distinction, then. Forgiveness addresses the eternal penalty and the relational rupture caused by sin. But justice requires consequences, correction, and maintaining order in the temporal world.
Exactly. Forgiveness is always absolute in the covenant sense, but it does not always negate the need for temporal discipline. To understand this dual truth, the analysis points us right back to the historical figure we just mentioned, Moses.
The famous incident where he struck the rock out of anger instead of speaking to it.
Precisely. Moses' sin was dealt with, he was forgiven, and his ultimate destiny was secure. But the temporal consequence of that disobedience, a sin that dishonored God before the people, was that he was forbidden from entering the Promised Land after leading Israel for 40 years.
That is such a staggering illustration of this paradox. The greatest prophet, fully forgiven, yet still facing the discipline of his action. It demonstrates that God is perfectly merciful and rigorously just. He treats sin seriously, even in the lives of his most devoted servants.
And this rigorous justice is not an act of malice, it's an act of loving authority. The source material links this Old Testament principle directly to the New Testament view of fatherly discipline, assuring us that God's correction is for our benefit.
This is the cross-reference to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6.
Which affirms, "For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth." God's discipline, the natural consequences of our inventions, is presented as evidence of his enduring fatherly love, not his rejection. He acts as a loving father who uses correction to teach wisdom and guide us back to the path of holiness.
So forgiveness removes the eternal damnation, but discipline, the consequence of our actions, is an active process of training us for better character and ultimate holiness.
It's vocational training for the soul. The You Need Faith in Jesus team emphasizes this as a crucial truth for the believer today. While we have full positional forgiveness through Christ, our actions still carry temporal consequences, God's loving discipline and correction.
This needs to motivate us, then, to live with greater self-control and wisdom, knowing that while God's grace is boundless, his standard of holiness remains absolute.
It leads directly to our practical motivation. This truth should inspire us to live wisely and obediently out of love and profound respect for a God who embodies both perfect love and perfect justice. We want to avoid the inventions that necessitate his painful but redemptive correction.
We acknowledge the paradox of grace and discipline, embracing both the comfort of forgiveness and the responsibility of correction. We've completed the arc of the psalm now, moving from the declaration of the king's character to the reality of his rule. And now we arrive at the conclusive final command, wrapping everything back into the defining theme of holiness.
This is the grand finale, the summation of the entire message. It echoes the earlier refrain, but it elevates the concept of access. Psalm 99, verse 9 reads, "Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill, for the Lord our God is holy."
It's a powerful restatement of verse 5, which commanded us to worship at his footstool, signifying humility. But here, the location is elevated to the holy hill.
Yeah.
What does that elevation signify?
The holy hill refers specifically to Mount Zion, the elevated site of Jerusalem where the temple stood. It is the physical, chosen place of worship. So the shift from footstool to holy hill signifies the full approach, not just humble submission, but the positive command to draw near to the designated sacred place of God's presence.
It's the ultimate summons to corporate and individual worship in the king's own domain.
And once again, the foundation is restated one final, non-negotiable time. For the Lord our God is holy. This holiness is the absolute defining reason for all exaltation, all humility, and all pilgrimage to his chosen place.
But the physical temple is gone. So for the modern learner, how does this command to worship at a physical holy hill even apply?
This is where the New Testament integration becomes the glorious culmination of the Psalms' instruction. The You Need Faith in Jesus team analysis provides a crucial understanding of the profound shift in access enabled by Jesus Christ. We are pointed to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22, which just revolutionizes this geographic command.
Please share that verse.
Hebrews 12:22 states, "But ye are come unto Mount Sion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem."
We are no longer making a pilgrimage to a physical hill on earth. We have been granted immediate access to the ultimate eternal reality.
Exactly. The need for a temporary earthly temple subject to destruction and limits is over. Through Christ, our high priest, we have direct, permanent access to the very throne room of heaven itself, the heavenly Mount Zion. We don't just worship at the footstool, we enter the city itself.
That is a staggering privilege. But it also elevates the standard of reverence required of us. If access is that direct, the expectation of holiness in our approach must surely be magnified.
It is. And this culminates in the final actionable step for every listener. This final verse is a personal, permanent summons to continually lift up the Lord in our lives and to worship him. Our worship has to be driven not by self-interest or transactional benefit, but simply because he, our God, is eternally and absolutely holy.
The purpose of our worship, and the ultimate reason for all our obedience is found entirely within his holy character.
So as we conclude this deep dive into Psalm 99, guided by the rich and detailed insights of the You Need Faith in Jesus team, we have witnessed a comprehensive portrait of the eternal King.
A portrait that begins with his absolute sovereignty, compelling us to overwhelming awe and leading us to that first crucial practical step. Let go of control and trust his perfect rule over every aspect of our lives.
We saw that his immense power is moderated by his love for perfect justice. This provides immense security and stability, and it demands that we, in turn, reflect his justice and integrity in all our personal and professional conduct.
We learned from the great intercessors, Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, that the king answers. But the efficacy of that dialogue is rooted in one key principle.
Obedience.
Obedience.
Oh?
Our third actionable step is thus. To commit to obedience is the foundation of effective prayer and alignment with the King's will.
And critically, we embrace the paradox of verse 8, a God who forgives fully through grace, yet still applies consequences and discipline, that vengeance of their inventions, as a loving, corrective father. This forces our fourth step, to live wisely and obediently, recognizing that forgiveness does not negate the need for correction or rigorous self-discipline.
And the constant unifying theme woven throughout the absolute non-negotiable heart of the entire psalm is God's unapproachable holiness, which is the sole reason he is worthy of our complete worship, exaltation, and deep humility.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward, building on that revolutionary concept of the heavenly Jerusalem. We noted the high demands placed on those approaching the physical, symbolic presence of God in the Old Testament, the trembling, the footstool, the specific sacrifices.
An elaborate system designed to guard the holy presence from the profane.
Right. Now, you, the believer, have been granted direct, immediate access to the heavenly reality itself through Christ, who is your high priest. The physical separation has been removed.
So if the standard of reverence demanded trembling before a physical symbol of God's rule, the ark or the footstool, how much more pervasive, profound, and absolute should our reverence be now that we approach the heavenly throne room itself? The bar for holiness has been raised, not lowered.
That is the crucial challenge Psalm 99 leaves us with. If your position now is direct access to the holy hill, does your daily life reflect the absolute, separate holiness of the God you approach? In what remaining areas of your heart or your routine are you still resisting the ultimate rule of the eternal King?
That reflection is where the integration of this knowledge truly begins. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth analysis of Psalm 99 and the sovereignty, justice, and holiness of the eternal King. We hope these comprehensive insights, guided by the valuable work of the You Need Faith in Jesus team, have left you with profound knowledge and a renewed sense of awe.
Keep learning, keep exploring, and may your pursuit of knowledge deepen your reverence for the Holy One.